The Truman Show is one of those movies that, even though it was partially a comedy with Jim Carrey's trademark humour, it didn't really feel like a comedy for the most part. Watching it felt more like I was watching a movie that was more trying to tell me something than anything else. The show itself, from my perspective, can give me multiple different ideas when examining the work. In particular, my mind was drawn to utilitarianism and the harm principle, as was presented by John Stuart Mill. I was drawn to the idea of hyperreality and metaphysics, which uneasily questions us on our position in the world. And finally, it should be mentioned that The Truman Show helped to lay out a valid and meaningful critique of the society we live in, picking apart the believable and yet at the same time absurd reactions by the people who watch The Truman Show and the disconnect through the screen that effectively erodes their humanity and empathy towards Truman until his daring escape, during which he is seen more like a character in a show than a real person, in spite of all that he had been through. So stay tuned, I am your host, Meaning in Media, covering The Truman Show, utilitarianism, hyperreality, and a lesson to society. So the first part I want to cover with this video is The Truman Show from a utilitarian perspective. This is probably going to be the longest section of the video because it is the part I have the most to say on. Now, to begin here, we have to define what utilitarianism even is. Utilitarianism is the philosophy that since happiness is what we are all aiming for as humans, happiness is a fundamental good. And if an action creates more happiness, then we should commit to that action as it's the right thing to do. Jeremy Bentham, the creator of utilitarianism, said that it was for the greatest happiness of the greatest number, which we should seek to accomplish to be more ethical. While, due to its criticisms, Mill developed Bentham's utilitarianism with the harm principle, which stated that even though, according to the previously developed principle of utility, that if an action creates happiness, it is good, it is also reasonable to say that if an action causes harm in any way, it is not ethical. Why is this relevant to The Truman Show, you may ask? Well, this is relevant because The Truman Show's main point of contention for the characters is the debate between is it ethical to keep Truman in his ignorant prison or not? Truman, for presumably 30 whole years, as it had been implied, had entertained the entire world, gifted them countless hours of entertainment, and to an extent comfort, as in the movie it is mentioned that some people leave the show on while they sleep. He even helps people socialise for watching the show together, best exemplified by the bar in which groups of people gather simply because they want to watch Truman. In spite of this, the people of the world have let Truman live in an artificial life, devoid of any real meaning. He is stood as a character on the screen, and through the screen is seen as nothing more than a character despite his advertised authenticity to the public. Before the harm principle, it could have been argued that utilitarianism supports this suffering of one for the benefit of many. However, with the harm principle in mind, we find that Truman's suffering is immoral and even unjustifiable. This is similar to the book Those Who Walk Away from Romulus, in the sense that, like in the book, a whole city must accept the suffering of one child for the good of all. Those in The Truman Show have to accept his dehumanization for entertainment and comfort. The one that walks away from the show, Truman's love interest, by comparison, is the movie's version of Those Who Walk Away from Romulus. They reject Truman's suffering and so are unable to take part in upholding it, compliant and complicit. So, onto the next segment of the video, existence and hyperreality. What is hyperreality? Hyperreality, in the words of Jean Baudrillard, a French sociologist and philosopher, is a real without origin or reality. The Truman Show is the embodiment of something we would consider hyperreal. Truman born into a world that is only real to him, a lie shielding him from the real reality. Everything that Truman experiences is artificial, only to those who understand the lie, but not to Truman himself. Christoph explains this to an interviewer he converses with midway through the film, stating quite strongly that we accept the world with which we are presented, and that, for me, was probably the most profound line in the whole movie. Christoph, for all the unjustifiable torment that he puts Truman through, is anything but wrong here. The sentence alone is part of the reason that some people believe we are in a simulation, why some think we live in a dream or in general accept that there is a possibility that none of this is real. If we accept the reality of which we are presented, then really how can we be sure that this is the true real? I am by no means an expert on this topic, especially with regard to metaphysics in general, but it is always an interesting thing to ponder, and it really helps to empathise with Truman when you consider that, one way or another, it is entirely possible that we, alone or as a species, could be just like him, a fact Christoph fails to understand. Looking down from his moon like an omnipotent and omniscient god, malevolent in nature, only caring about his art. The final thing I want to talk about is the fact that the people in the Truman Show are just horrible people. And I know that might be quite a bit to digest since I've just thrown that at you, but if you think about it, that's just the case. And to an extent, the Truman Show can be seen as a criticism to society as a whole. Well, with regards to the later developed reality TV and even just their own morality. The actors in the Truman Show can barely even be considered people in the way they are presented. Those closest to Truman are willing slaves to the studio they work under. They are puppets spouting meaningless lies and lines, told not even by themselves, but by the director. Even if one believes in free will, like Sartre said on the topic, they have forfeit said free will to fulfill their role. These actors have thrown away their ethics and morality to please an audience or a big business through the constant and not so subtle advertisements. These actors are not the only immoral ones either. The people watching The Truman Show, while they can be considered supportive of Truman once he is on his great escape, they tolerated his abuse for decades, and once all was over they treated him like any other hero in a movie. They forgot he existed, they moved on. They threw him away like a used toy, they looked for another show. It is, while funny, a demoralising end to the movie, as it feels like you, as the viewer, have been cheated of your satisfying ending. Truman is free, but it seems like nobody really learned anything on the side of the audience, and therefore it is very likely that in spite of all that had happened, it could probably and most likely happen again. Christoph's sick experiment can simply be repeated, even if not by Christoph himself, more efficiently and effectively with prior experience, and with less likelihood of the new main character ever leaving. Truman's victory meant next to nothing outside of himself. And that's the meaning I got from The Truman Show. Feel free to like the video, subscribe, and give me any ideas as to what you would like to see next or what I could do better. This was your host, Meaning Media. Have a nice day.